Welcome to Law Help Australia, where we keep you safe and informed with tips and updates. My name is Dinesh Virakpudi. In 2011 census, it was revealed that a quarter of the Australian population weren't born overseas. 43% of Australians have at least one parent born overseas. Asian Australians count for 10%. Australia is a multi-ethnic, multicultural society. But the question is, does that diversity reflect in leadership roles in government organizations and private institutions? Well, behind me is a conversation. Let's find out more. So we are at the 4th Asian Australian Conversation, organized by Dawn and the Australian Asian Lawyers Association.
Good afternoon. My name is Di Lee and I'm the founder of an organisation called Dawn, which stands for Diverse Australasian Women's Network. The 10% in Australia, there's 10% of our population are of Asian heritage. And so Dawn and Raina Tangs, who's the president of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association, also driving that conversation around the need to see an increase in Asian Australian representation in the higher echelon of the Australian legal fraternity. We thought we need to collaborate because I think a lone voice out there in this big forest we call Australia is going to be hard to be heard. So we're joining forces so that the message about Australian mainstream institutions such as law firms, the media organisation, politics and other corporate sector take stock and look at what's happening within the companies and how to promote Asian Australians from within the organisations to step up to senior leadership roles, executive roles, or C-suites as I call them, in the future. So I'm from Sydney and I'm here with Tammy Dip, and who's helping me, and we are a not-for-profit organisation. We don't get paid for this, we do this at our own time and our own belief and passion. And I will be handing this over to Raina, who will be facilitating.
My name is Catherine Tay-White. I'm Managing Director of Future Eye, and my place or role here tonight has been to talk about my experience being an Asian woman in Australia and the types of challenges that I've faced. And my real message to people who are wanting to be leaders in Australia is to understand what the expectations might be and really don't take the sides that they might feel not accepted and actually challenge themselves to go for leadership positions. I think that's really important to break the feeling that there's a barrier ceiling.
Good evening. My name is Zabin Chen. Most people just call me Bin. I was a public servant of 32 years experience and a community advocate about the same length of time, and also the accidental politician, having been a senator in the Australian Senate between 1999 and 2005. I think I'm very privileged here tonight to be part of this conversation, and I'd like to congratulate the organisers for the choice of their topic particularly, which is us and them, how to make Chinese Asian Australia to feel accepted in Australian society.
Sitting next to me is Raina Tang. He's the president of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association. He's also the former president of the Law Institute of Victoria. Raina, can you tell us about the topic in this conversation?
Yes, tonight we were talking about us and them. What will it take to help Asian Australians feel accepted in Australian society? Tonight we were very privileged to hear from two guest speakers, Catherine Tay-White, who's the Managing Director of a public relations consultancy called Future Eye, and Zabin Chen, who is the former Senator between 1999 and 2005. And what they talked to us about was their own experiences in Australian society and the challenges in feeling accepted in that society.
Asian Australian Lawyers Association. Raina, can I ask about the objectives behind this organisation and the motivation?
The Asian Australian Lawyers Association was established in 2013 when I was president of the Law Institute of Victoria. And it came about because a lot of people were talking to me about their experiences as Asian Australians within the legal community, not seeing role models in the senior echelons of the legal profession, so partners in law firms, members of the bar, particularly the senior bar, and also in the judiciary. And so the aims of the association are actually to improve the diversity that we see in the legal profession from a cultural perspective, and also to develop links into Asia between the Australian legal community. Talk about the topic tonight, which is us and them, what we have to do to get Asian Australians to be accepted in Australian society. So I thought I'd start with you, Catherine, and I'm just sort of interested in your own cultural background, if you could share that with the audience.
Sure, I was born in Australia, and then my father was Chinese Malaysian. And so 6 years in Malaysia means that I feel that I understand an Asian culture. Chinese was my first language. I kind of genuinely feel like I'm both Australian and Asian. In a way, the worst of both worlds. I'm not quite as seen as Asian, and I'm not quite seen as Australian, so I'm sort of right in the middle. I kind of feel that all the time.
Catherine, in terms of your career, I sort of understand you started your career working with The Age at 18, and then subsequently you went into public relations in the sort of mining industry. And what's that like, being an Asian Australian female? How did you find those experiences?
Well, I was lucky to be able to get in. If it hadn't been for the way that The Age newspaper set up their cadet processes, there's a chance I might have been able to, because the way the Herald and Weekly Times did it when I was 17 years old, there was a sort of old white male who interviewed me, and the first series of questions he asked me was, who won the VFL in 1972, and who won the Melbourne Cup in 1925, and things like this, which I would have absolutely no interest in sport. I have no interest in any of those statistics. And then he turned around and said to me, so, do you have a chip on your shoulder because you're half Chinese? And I went, well, I was 17 years old, and he then said to me, so, tell me, does your mother work? I said, yes. And he had his legs up on the table, and he was leaning back with both his arms up, his hip thrust forward, and he said, what does she do? I said, she's an equal opportunity advisor. He went, fell off the chair. So I didn't get a job there, but at The Age they do an exam. There was 2,000 people that sit the exam, 100 people get interviewed, and then 6 people get chosen. And I went through that process, and on merit, I was able to get through to be a cadet. So that was a very exciting thing, and I just loved being a journalist. And then I went in to do major projects to really, I guess, my interest or my specialty was this gap between what society said they wanted and expected and what companies were delivering. And I was interested in how you close that gap. So that's what made me move.
Then I wanted to pick up, I understand you've got quite an interest in sort of the history of the Chinese in Australia, and I think you've got a view, or you had a view at least, that in terms of the White Australia policy, that might have been influenced in part by the isolation of the Chinese community from the rest of the Australian community. I'm sort of wondering whether, one, you still hold that view, and if you do, whether you see things have improved now, are Chinese Australians more, or Asian Australians more involved in the community more generally?
I used to think that the reason that White Australia policy got established, one of the factors was that the Chinese, back in the turn of the century, when Australia was federating, at that stage the Chinese tend to keep it themselves in their own Chinese community, which the Chinese tend to do anyway, and not only in Australia, but also in Southeast Asia, and so it became isolated and difficult to make friends or make contact with the mainstream community. So when people with different political agendas come in to say that we need to create a white Australia and keep these Asians out, this Asian who are uneducated, who live differently, look differently, speak differently, have different habits, they should keep out. And by that time, people have already made up their mind. It's much harder to change their mind. Since then, I've changed my perception a little bit. I think the issue is more complex than that. I think the Chinese actually did put up a very good fight, but nevertheless, the self-imposed isolation still was a factor, not necessarily the most important factor, but a factor. And it's the same way we have seen happen with the Chinese community in Malaysia, for example. Chinese did put up a very big fight, but on the whole, by the time the Federation came around, the horses were already bought.
And Catherine, obviously you are now the Managing Director of Future-i, which is a consultancy in the public relations space. But I was looking at your website and noticed that you've got this sort of idea about companies needing a social license to operate. And I was sort of struck by what you described about social license, which you could explain, but I just wondered whether you see that there's parallels between companies and perhaps community groups like Asian Australians. Do we also need a social license to operate within Australian society?
Yeah, I mean, the concept or the dimensions of what a company's social license are and the dimensions of what a citizenships and the license that a community members have some really significant parallels. So just one of my undergraduate essays that I remember really a lot was one where I wrote a comparison between the experience of Chinese citizens in Australia compared to Chinese citizens in Indonesia compared to Chinese citizens in Malaysia, and what their experience of citizenship was in those different countries. So the thing to note is in Indonesia, the Chinese aren't allowed to express any cultural symbols of being Chinese. You can't have a Chinese name, you can't have Chinese letters on your shop. There's no cultural acceptance, but there is economic acceptance. And in Malaysia, there is social acceptance and political acceptance, but no political acceptance, if you like, because there is the reverse discrimination issues. In Australia, we had examples of where there was no economic citizenship allowed. So the Chinese were doing well with gold mining, so they were banned from gold mining during the gold rush. They were moved on to tailings dams, tailings stockpiles, and because they did well there, they were banned from that. Then they moved on to shops, and they did well there, they were banned from that. And finally, they were banned from entry. So the whole the sanction was an economic sanction. And the perception of the story of the Chinese here, and what Marilyn Lake wrote about, was that there is a story of essentially invisibility, just ignored. And if you're ignored, what happens is the perception is, well, gee, if I'm ignored, then should I really have a voice? Do I have a right for a voice? And that's where the social license issues come in. You actually have to feel like you have a right for a voice in order to have a voice. And in the case of the relationship to what we do as a business, we talk to companies about actually understanding their communities and giving them a voice and helping them understand the context for their business, not just in terms of what they want to do, what their business objective is, but the societal expectations, even those people who have unvoiced concerns.
I probably wanted to turn in a little bit to the political side of your history, and so I understand you have been a Liberal Party member from something like 1972, so a very long time. What I'm really quite interested in is, you were talking about before the White Australia policy being a bipartisan policy, and so whether you perceive the different parties that have a different view about cultural diversity within their parties and within Australian society generally. And we've sort of seen it a little bit in the discussion about the China-Australian Free Trade Agreement. So,
in 1900, when Australia was established, certainly White Australia policy was bipartisan, had bipartisan support. By the time I came in 1958, the bipartisan support was still very strong. The Liberal Party at that time, under Robert Menzies, actually was more, how should I say, more progressive thinking about Australia's place in Asia, whereas the Labor Party were at that time very strongly White Australia. Still, White Australia's policy was still their official platform.
But at this point, I'd like to sort of open up to the audience. So there's a spare seat here. So the idea is you come in and have a chance to ask a question and in a safe conversational environment.
As a person who arrived here only about 11 years ago, I didn't have the advantage of studying here. Well, I did my master's at London, but not growing up here. So it was much harder than for people who are born here and who've been educated here. And I was told when I was looking for a job in the legal industry, having practiced in India for about 7 years, that don't even try for the bigger law firms. Just go for the smaller, there's nice boutique firms, you should try for that. I did end up working for Clayton Mills and Winters, and I've been working with the Victorian Government Solicitor's Office for 8 years now. Hopefully I've proven them wrong, but there's a lot of my friends who haven't been able to do that because they just feel that they can't compete and they're not confident of that. So maybe we're selling ourselves short, and I understand not everyone's going to be as pushy and not ambitious, but then that's where our collective voice comes, and that's where organizations like AALA and Dawn, we need to push for that, for our communities to be recognized and our people to move forward. So I welcome any comments on that.
Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. It's a sense of saying, when you say collectively move our people forward, some of that language bothers me because there's a common concept of, well, what's the role of trying to integrate and at the same time acknowledge difference? And so I think there's an interesting tension there where, who do you associate with? And is it race-based or is it profession-based, and what does it actually, where's the differentiation come? So to some extent, I'm a kind of merit-based arguer. I would say, well, it's not because I'm a woman and it's not because I'm Asian that you should put me forward. You should put me forward because I'm great at what I do and because I've worked really hard to do that. But at the same time, if you look around, those merit-based arguments haven't been sufficient for Asians to stand up and actually take political and leadership roles in our community. And so maybe it is timely to kind of think of it collectively, but it's a tough challenge there.
For you guys, very inspiring speakers and stories. This is just from my personal experience in the Cambodian community. I'm not sure whether it's relevant to other communities, but we have this kind of hierarchical system where the people, like the elderly, kind of discourage you from being in leadership positions and like doing things like starting your own company, and even in our homes, like they don't like women or to do many things. So I'm just wondering whether that plays a role in breaking the glass ceiling. For me personally, the only way that I actually achieved anything was I had to go to the wider Australian community, so I had to go to non-Asians, or yes, I had to go to non-Asians to get help, or Asians who were not connected to the Asian community. And do you think maybe that plays a role in why we're not pursuing these opportunities in leadership positions?
There was absolutely, I come from 6th generation entrepreneurs on my father's side of the family, and 2 generations of activists on my mother's side of the family. There was absolutely nothing holding me back from
wanting to have a leadership position, but there was a lot holding me back from having a public position because they were not comfortable with me going and being a show-off on the public stage or talking in a public environment or whatever. So I was very, very discouraged to do that. But in business, no problem, right? So I'm only now starting to feel comfortable speaking in a public environment or revealing anything of myself. That was something I was very discouraged to do, you know, absolutely.
I stand here on behalf of Baker McKenzie, as opposed to the Asian Australian Lawyers Association, and I'd like to thank Catherine, Ben and Di for for a wonderful event and a wonderful evening. So thank you very much.
At Law Help Australia, we encourage cultural diversity and also a debate on cultural leadership. That's the end of the show today. If you want to catch up on our past episodes, you can go to our YouTube channel or you can visit us on Facebook. You can also go to our webpage www.lawhelpaustralia.org. If you want to participate or if you have an idea, you can email us. Bye for now.